What is up, side hustlers, entrepreneurs, business builders, and dream makers? Welcome to the Set Your Side Hustle Podcast, episode 57. Today is a glorious Wednesday, which means that today we are doing a book review. Before we get into that, yesterday was the 4th of July. Happy 4th of July, everybody. 4th of July is also my wife's birthday. And I also got some concerning family news late Monday. So I'm not ready to really share that with the public just yet. There's some things that gotta get worked out still, but some family news came up. It's my wife's birthday, it's a national holiday. So for all of those reasons, I decided not to work yesterday, and therefore I did not record a podcast episode yesterday. I think that's justified, and so from that, we're gonna be moving forward today, and we are on episode 57 doing a great book review of a fantastic book known as Good to Great. The book Good to Great is actually an exposition on the findings of a intentional research project where the founders, led by Jim Collins and his team, tried to determine what it actually takes for a company to have explosive growth, to go from a good company to a great company. They specifically looked at companies that were traded on the open market so they could look at their stocks. And so the standards that they used were something like this. They looked at companies that made the leap to great results and sustained those results for at least 15 years. How great? After the leap, the good to great companies generated cumulative stock returns that beat the general stock market by an average of 7 times in 15 years, better than twice the results delivered by a composite index of the world's greatest companies, including Coca-Cola, Intel, General Electric, and Merck. So those are their standards. The company needed to see an explosive growth, and then it needed to sustain that growth while beating the market. And if the company did those two things, then it was included into the investigation in the research that conducted to make Good to Great. So this book is focused on figuring out what it takes to go from being good to being exceptional and maintaining that. And so there's a ton of value that you can get out of this book. It's a pretty big book, but I'm going to share a couple principles that they found in it that you can take with you and implement in your business. So first off is leadership. In the book, Jim's pretty explicit about how they tried to avoid mentioning the leader because they wanted to look at metrics that affected the entire company. But when they were doing the investigation, they realized that if they were to ignore what the leaders of these companies were doing, then that would be a detriment to the study because all of the leaders had something in common, a couple things in common, actually. But one of those key things is that great leaders, the leaders of each of these great companies that was investigated, they all had this similarity in which they took blame and they gave credit. So when things went wrong, it was the leader's fault. That's what the leader would say publicly. And when things went right, it was the team's fault. And that's what the leader would say publicly. And so you get this consistency that the leader takes the blame and gives the credit. The next big lesson that you're going to get out of this is this idea of getting the right people on the bus before you try to go anywhere. And so before you deal with the what, you need to figure out the who, get the right team, get the right people in the seats before you start trying to take off and go in any direction. So oftentimes what these companies would do when they had that massive pivot is that they would have a massive rehiring phase. They would have C-level execs switch. They would have directors switch, and they would get the right people on the bus before they dealt with their direction, which kind of leads us to the next and probably the last point that I'm going to give you, because I don't want to give away this book. I want you to read it. It's an amazing book. Is something that the book calls the hedgehog concept. So the hedgehog concept is that companies that excel at what they do have a clear understanding of what they can be the best in the world at, what drives their economic engine, and what they are passionate about, and that is all that they focus on. They focus on being the best at one particular thing, and they let everything else go away. All in all, Good to Great is actually a phenomenal book. I've read it a couple times. I have a high level of respect for it and appreciation for it. It's well-researched, deep-rooted, and you might not be an owner of a company that is publicly traded yet or ever, but that doesn't mean that these principles can't be useful for you. The reality is that most of the things that make for great companies are true at every level of business. So they're absolutely applicable to you and me. Great read, highly recommend it. If you want to buy this book today, you can get it on Amazon. But if you use my link, they will also go to Amazon. You'll pay the same price, and I'll get a tiny little commission out of it. So if you want to help me out in that way, you can go ahead and pick up Good to Great through the link in the description. Love you guys so much. Talk to you tomorrow.